right, looks like I'm live. Let's verify. Maybe it'll take a second. And broadcast. Come on. There we go. All right, looks like I'm live. Let's verify. All right, we are in business. Welcome, welcome. Just started my stream, so I'm talking to myself, but that will change. Let me make my LinkedIn post. Okay. There we go. I am live. Thank you. All right. So, apologies, I'm new to streaming and I'm trying to make sure that this chat window stays visible, and it seems to disappear whenever I click away. Okay, I can put it there, and yeah, great. Good to go. So, thanks for listening in. I'm not seeing my viewer count. That's fine. Don't need to. Okay, so I'll try and do this in a way that people can get value from it without having to watch from the beginning. What I'm doing is just open office hours. Happy to answer any questions as they come up. And while I don't have any questions to address, I'll just be getting back to what I had in mind to work on as kind of a backup. So I'm not just staring at the screen, which isn't the most effective. All right. So I have this count square islands problem, which is a variation on top of the very popular count the number of islands problem that you may have seen. It's really popular. It's on LeetCode, Geeks for Geeks, all the other sites. I think this is an interesting variation on top of that that adds additional criteria on top of what makes what you're searching for. So instead of just searching for an island of arbitrary shape, we're searching for a square island, which may sound easier, but often is harder for people. This question has about a 30% pass rate, which is honestly a lot lower than I thought, given it's a lot lower than I thought when I came up with the problem. But I think it's a really interesting problem where if you aren't able to come up with the right separation of concerns as you're deriving your solution, you can get lost in the details, and that can slow you down. You're kind of thinking about all the corner cases with each line of code that you write. So what we're looking at right now is actually my own website. So I have a website where you can try the algorithm yourself. coachmatt.io. If you go to algos, you can click on count square islands. This is labeled one of the hard problems. Yeah, welcome Ryan, by the way. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But otherwise I will continue. So I already have a reference solution here, and this is just an iterative approach. I'm not going to really spend time on this. You're welcome to look at the reference solution yourself in your own time. But what I want to do is adapt the kind of the well-known solution, which finds the number of islands, and make that only consider square islands. So we're going to kind of adapt the really popular problem of finding islands and make that work. make that existing solution work for finding square islands. So let's kind of forget about the specifics of this prompt right now. Let's get this algo.js script working such that it is finding islands, finding the number of islands. So, and then if I run this, it's going to fail a bunch of tests because we've changed the problem definition. But essentially, this is a recursive problem where you do a depth first search, making sure you don't revisit any cells. And each piece of land that you find, you do your depth first search and go as far as you can. And when you're done, you can add one to a counter to mark that as an island that you found. So we can get rid of this comment for now just to save screen space. If we can think of helper functions, we can have a function, what do I want to call this? This will be the depth first search. So I could just say search. I can call it search, give it the matrix, the current row, and current column. Okay, so what we want to do here is a depth first search in all directions. And we want to make sure we don't do this. We don't count, we don't revisit the same piece of land multiple times. So we have this test case hard coded right here. What we can do is, yeah, let's start with search. Okay. So search can, what we can do first is to make sure we don't revisit land multiple times, we can erase the land at that coordinate. So what we can do is if matrix row and column equals 1, matrix row and column equals 0. And now we want to continue traversing. So I'm going to be deliberately making a few mistakes along the way, and we can maybe fix those. So now what we want to do is we want to go in the 8 direction. So that includes diagonal, going diagonally. We can maybe just do that in like a for loop. And search matrix row plus delta row, column plus delta column. Okay, so this is going to kind of flood fill, erase the whole island that we find. What we can do is make sure, let's just call our, okay, let's just do a really quick and dirty test here. So what I want to do is I want to call search and give it this coordinate and make sure that it erases all of the land. So what we can do is console.log matrix at the end here. Can I explain the mental model of how I would decide which pattern to use to solve the problem? Sure. Let me finish this thought and test this search algorithm, and then I can do that. So, right, search. Let's call it with a matrix, and then coordinates 1, 1. So doing that kind of right here. We should expect this to be an empty array now. So everything's set to 0. And then if we maybe call it with 0, 0 as the coordinates, it does not erase them. Okay, great. So that is working as expected. So if it takes just a few seconds, you can write a couple lines to test your helper functions along the way. That can be really helpful in an interview. Right, so explaining the mental model of how I would decide which pattern to use to solve a problem. Yeah, so I mean that's a very general question. That's essentially like asking like how do you decide which approach to use to solve a problem. So what I was doing, so what I'm doing here with this count square islands problem is we're starting with an existing solution and we're going to adapt that to work for the count square islands. So maybe what I can do is explain this in kind of two stages, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm assuming we have a working solution for finding the number of islands, and I'm getting to that solution. I'm going to adapt that. So I can explain how we might come up with an approach to finding the number of islands, and then assuming that solution, I can explain how we can come up with an approach to the number of square islands. I feel like I'm repeating myself. Okay, so right, so if we're, and this is a really popular solution, so I was kind of planning on skipping over how to derive that exact solution, but maybe since this is a problem that a lot of people have seen before, they can kind of see explaining my thought process might actually be easier to follow if you're already really familiar with the problem itself. So drawing a straight line is very hard on my tablet. Okay. So what we're trying to do is find, okay. Finding the number of islands. So the definition of that is an island is going to be a contiguous group of cells that are on the cells are typically represented in a two-dimensional array. Are there any keywords in the question that give hints? That depends on the prompt, really. So there can very often be really important details about the prompt, like corner cases and things like that. So given a 2D matrix where 1 represents land and 0 represents water, return the number of, we're just going to say islands for now. So I think there's a lot that's kind of said and then a lot that can be assumed, or things that you can't necessarily assume. So so one of the things that I'm actually doing here is I'm modifying the data myself. That's not something that you can typically assume. I would much prefer that you actually ask the interviewer if you can modify the data that you're given. Right, you can imagine that if you're using some third-party library, you wouldn't necessarily want your data to change in arbitrary ways whenever you call some function. So that's a good thing to check. And in fact, I actually do have a test in the test suite here under extra credit that verifies the input data is unmodified. So that was one of those things I was kind of looking to, a test I was looking to fail and use that as a talking point later. So, right. So in terms of like keywords, with this problem, it's a very simple problem definition. So we have a 2D matrix. So we have this kind of two-dimensional space. So that typically means there's going to be some kind of, well, if you're working with a data set like that, it typically means there's going to be some kind of traversal of that data. Okay. back. So if we, my tablet's acting up, sorry. Okay. I might have to just use my mouse today. Okay, we're back. So, right, so let me just kind of come up with a simple example. So I think, well, first of all, when you're asked a question, you really want to come up with, you want to make sure that you have the same understanding as the interviewer about that problem. So so let's kind of cover that, and then we can talk a little bit more about the problem definition and approaches and all of that. But when you're asked to find the number of islands, like one question is, one natural question that comes up is, what is an island? Right? So you can imagine an island, right? So a lot of people would probably define an island as, connected cells that are on. And right now our two-dimensional matrix has each cell as 1 or 0. 1 being on or land, and 0 being off or water. So I think everyone would agree that this is one island. However, what is this? Is this 1 or 2? So I think that actually kind of depends on the interviewer, on kind of what they think. I think this is kind of ambiguous given the original problem definition. Unless, say, they have an example that shows that case right here. So if you can see my mouse over here on the left, I do have this here, and then over in the corner here, I consider this all to be kind of one island. So I think those kinds of corner cases are really important. Another natural corner case is literally the corner. What does it mean for this to be on the corner? I think this one is kind of less of a. I think a lot more people are going to agree. A lot more interviewers would agree on kind of their own definition of the problem here, in that everything outside of the original matrix should be implicitly treated as water, right? So then you have basically kind of two square islands. Excuse me, not square islands. 2 islands here. So this is 1, and then this is 2. Let me actually just draw a little circle around that to make it a little more obvious, right? So 1 and then 2 as your islands. So, yeah, and then when you're kind of thinking about the nature of the problem, right? We have this two-dimensional matrix. We need to be able to count the islands. We want to make sure that we don't get into any infinite loops. We want to make sure our function terminates. These are all things that you just are generally aware of, right? You want to make sure that whenever you're writing code, it will terminate. So for the number of islands, if we think about this, what am I trying to say here? Right. So to come up with an approach here, we need to recognize kind of what concepts we want to use here. So, remembering we want to not get into an infinite loop. We want to make sure we don't revisit the same piece of land multiple times. So then there needs to be some kind of additional memory usage of tracking which cells we visited, or modifying the original data. So I did specify that I do have a test case that makes sure we don't modify our data directly. So let's just assume that we're not going to modify our data. We need to use some additional memory to track that. Like in JavaScript specifically, if we have our own visited array, our own kind of like set of visited elements, so maybe you can use some kind of new map, or let's just new set, right? So you have, so you know, if you're using a set, so really kind of all the specifics, I think, or all the kind of the patterns and the specifics of the problem really just derive naturally from the specifics of the problem itself. So now if we have this kind of visited set, then you have to be aware of, you know, if I do something like visited dot add some kind of coordinate, however you specified, you know, row of 1 and column of 1, and then if you do, whoops, didn't mean to do a test run. And then if you say .get, not .get, it's a has. This is going to give you false because these are actually different objects. So like if you want to be able to add a coordinate and then look that back up, then you have to do some kind of maybe stringification. So you can do, you know, R, I guess, plus comma plus C to do that. So my point is, and let me know, Ryan, too, if you feel like I'm going too slow, or if this feels kind of like what you had in mind. Right. So now that we're kind of aware of tracking what we visited, then there's the additional specifics of, you know, making sure that we use this set, or if you wanted to use like a plain object to do that correctly. So, and if you actually had some issues, then, you know, with proper testing, hopefully you'd be able to, you know, figure out those bugs. So, right. So if we kind of look at a more complex example here with maybe a few more cells, and we are trying to do kind of our flood fill. So depth first search, it's a lot like in Microsoft Paint, if you ever use that, right? So you like find some cell, and then you find some pixel, and then you know, click the paint bucket and then pick some color, and then everything that is the same color will just, you know, end up being painted. So yeah, nothing too crazy there. So, you know, to do that, you need to do kind of a traversal, right? So you can do depth first or breadth first. There are implications about doing kind of depth first versus breadth first. So if we think about our algorithm, what we want to do is we want to go until we kind of find some land. So here's some land. And then we want to essentially mark all of the cells as visited, and then count that as one piece of land. So what you would want to do is, you know, from here you can, you know, visit all of your neighbors. So there's your 8 neighbors here. So remember, we are counting corners. So from here, we're gonna, you know, visit this one and then this one. So right, you know, depth first search. Nothing kind of groundbreaking here. And yeah, so, you know, that's gonna count this whole thing as one island, and then this thing here. Maybe you could even think of, if you want to be super specific, you could ask another clarifying question is like, well, what about a 1x1 island? Is that like maybe too small? You know, that could be a corner case. Like, is there a minimum island size? Is there a maximum island size? So here, the minimum island size is 1. Yeah. Okay. So, right. So you do your flood fill. Okay. So let me kind of let me kind of speed along our original solution so we can get to, I think, kind of the interesting finding the number of square islands. So count square islands. We're just doing count islands right now. Okay, so if we have our search, what we can do is basically for each cell, like I was saying, for let row equals 0, row must be less than matrix dot length row plus plus, or let column equals 0, column is less than matrix 0 dot length. Another good clarifying question is the input array rectangular? Let's assume it is. If matrix row column, let's search the whole island. Search matrix row and column, and then result plus plus. So we have our result equals 0, and then return result. So this should give us 1 if we run it, and it does. Okay. And if we maybe modify our test case, this should still be 1. And then if we add 1 over here, I think this is going to give us a bug. Yeah, so we're getting out of bounds. So we just have to make sure that, yeah, so well, let's actually look at this. So we're getting a cannot read properties undefined, reading 2, index 2. At search, solve line 2. So we have our error here. So essentially what's happening is we could actually, if you're still kind of stuck, you could just log this out, right? So I'm just showing you kind of good debugging technique. So console.log row column. Let's run this again. So we have a row of 4, column of 2. So 4, this is 0 indexed. That's too far down. What we can actually do is we can just do a conditional lookup. So this is like an ES6 ES6 feature. So conditional, I don't see it here, but yeah. So this, question mark and dot, it's the conceptually it's the exact same thing as doing something like matrix row and matrix like that. Well, it's similar. So yeah, maybe I'll just okay, so now this is giving us 2 optional chaining. Yeah, thank you. So we expect 2 now with our new test case, and we're not blowing up. So that's great. So we seem to have a working kind of find the number of islands solution. So if we go back here and we think about finding the number of square islands, let's look at this again. So what I want to do is modify the solution that we have without kind of going back to square one. So we do have an algorithm that will find the number of islands. And what we want to do is find the number of square islands. So maybe let's have a slightly different test case here. Let's actually have a square island here. And I don't think you've seen this version of Ryan. I don't think you've seen this version of the reference, this reference solution. Hopefully, optional chaining looks weird. Looking at arrays, right? Yeah. So optional chaining does look kind of funny, especially if you're newer to it. So I think you can even do it kind of with functions. So you could do something like, let function equals null, and you can do something like function. You can do that. And then if, function equals console.log hello world, let me get rid of this debug up here. I'm pretty sure this will work. You can do this. So yeah, and that, yeah, this is kind of the same thing as this, or if function. It's all the same really in this case. You do have to be aware about truthiness and falsiness. If you don't know what that is, then definitely look up truthiness and falsiness, because that's a really important topic to be bulletproof on. But yeah, so back to finding the number of square islands. So, right, so our algorithm finds a number of islands. We want to just also make sure we're only counting the number of square islands. So we need to have, I guess, some additional kind of checks or filters on top of whenever we find an island to make sure that it's actually square. So kind of thinking about the problem again, we can really just think about kind of, well, what are some specifics of what are some specifics of squares, right? So the width should not be using my mouse. I should be using my tablet. The width equals the height, right? So similarly, maybe we can just call this a size or an S. So area is equal to the size squared, right? So I think these are all kind of, these are really kind of the only qualities of squares. But actually, as we're thinking about this problem, I am kind of now remembering another corner case that is interesting. So if we have kind of our islands, so yeah, so let's go back over here. So I'm not going to fill these cells in as cleanly. Just to make a quick example. So if we have something like this is still very clearly a square island, but what if there's a hole in it? I guess I can use an eraser, or I'll just draw with black for now. Or can I? Nope. Yeah, so bear with me while I familiarize myself with Excalidraw. Another great thing in interviewing is to know your tools, and I am not as well versed as I would like to be with Excalidraw. Oh wow, no light mode, thank you. Okay, fine. Let's just, no, that's not what I wanted. Okay, that'll work. Right, so imagine, it's kind of a 3x3 island, and then there's nothing in the middle. So is that a square island? I think that's a fantastic clarifying question. That's something that about maybe 10% of the people that I ask this question think about. And to keep things simple, let's actually assume that this will not be a square island. Our definition of a square island is going to be an island that has no holes in it and is square, has no other kind of extruding edges. Right, so let me undo and get back to here. Okay. Right, and get back to, no. our previous state. Okay, great. So, right, so if we recognize that a square has the same width and height, and then the area is the size squared, then what we can do is basically just whenever we find a island, if we keep track of the kind of the bounding box, right? So if we keep track of like the minimum row, right? So we know that this is kind of the minimum row, and this is the maximum row, and you know, that's the span, and this is the minimum column and maximum column. Then that's kind of the span. So so this is index 1 1, index 2 2. So if we're really careful here, we might notice something that's a really common mistake. So to get this width, it's not actually the maximum column minus the minimum column, because that would be 1. It's max minus the min plus 1. And then the same here. And then you can square those. And then with that, you kind of have the bounding box of your island. You can make sure the width and the height are equal. And then with that, you also know exactly how many cells there should be. And there's only one way for there to be that many cells, and that's if the entire square is full. So I think that's a really clean way to adapt this number of square islands to work with finding the number of square islands. So if there's any confusion about that, please let me know. Also happy to answer questions that are not about this specifically. Just any career questions, soft skills, what'd you have for breakfast? Right. Okay. So, and one of the things that I see a lot too is that if you get stuck, if you keep getting stuck in algorithms, or really in just software development in general, it can be really helpful to kind of write down what you know as you go. So maybe someone that already knows this, that can think of the solution to an algorithm just really quickly, can go ahead and write the code and, you know, bang that out top to bottom, first pass, run it, everything works, beautiful code. That is not the norm. If you go through an interview process and your experience is all the interview questions are that easy, then that's kind of a red flag. That company maybe doesn't know how to interview, or maybe you're interviewing for a role that's too junior. Yeah, so interviews should be, I think, appropriately challenging and interesting. It should be an engaging conversation all around. So, right. So on that note, kind of ways to help your thought process around is obviously like draw pictures like this. So using Excalidraw or even like a pen and paper. You know, it's even fine to, so if you're using like CoderPad, I lost my link, but so CoderPad even has like a drawing tool where you can draw. So just, you know, make sure you know the tools that you're working with. If you're doing an interview, definitely find out, if you're doing an interview online, definitely find out like where the call is going to be, where you're going to be writing your code, if you can actually write your own code. So a lot of companies, if you can run your own code, a lot of companies don't necessarily let you run your own code in an interview. I have some thoughts about that, but I think there's, you know, merits to both sides. Welcome. So yeah, so we're going over finding where we have a working solution for finding the number of islands. It's a really common interview problem, and we're adapting that to work to find the number of square islands. And what I'm going over right now is actually some ways that you can kind of help your thought process along if you find that you're getting stuck, or really if you find you're getting stuck or kind of slowing down. And that's to, make sure you know your tools, maybe draw things out. Comments can be really great. So search here, what we want to do, so these comments, right? So we want to keep track of min and max row and column, or you could just call that the bounding box, track bounding box. Calculate width and height. If width not equal to height, not a square. If visited count is not equal width times height, not a square. Right, so these are all things that we want to check for. So I think this also kind of warrants some extra arguments that we would need. And by the way, you guys, I've thought about this reference solution, but I actually haven't coded it up before. This is actually my first time coding this up, so we're in a way all in this together. Even though I've asked this interview question many times. So hopefully I'm going at a pace where you're able to kind of think along, or maybe even go a little faster, and you're not just kind of playing catch up the whole time. Right, we have, so this search, I think what we can do is maybe rename this, because what we were doing before is we were just assuming that this is always going to count. So what we can do is maybe rename this to is square. Okay, and this can return a Boolean. To say if that is square or not. Okay, so is square. And then we're going to do if it's a square. So I think the new function naming kind of makes this pretty readable. You could even squish this into one if statement. I like that more, and clean that up. Right. So basically, for each cell that is on or land, if there's a square there, result plus plus. And for now, we're erasing the land as we go. That'll be an issue that we can fix later, time permitting. Right. So what I'm thinking about now is kind of the cleanest way to track all of this. And what I'm thinking is actually maybe we want kind of another helper function to do the actual recursion while we maybe have some kind of variables up here. Minimum row, max row, let minimum column, max column. Let's actually just define each of these on its own line. So also, when you're defining variables, it's a good idea to make sure that you are initializing them properly. So if we set all of these to 0, which generally 0 kind of feels like an appropriate initial value. You'd imagine later that basically whenever you visit a coordinate, your minimum would be, if the coordinate that you're at is less than the minimum that you've seen, then you would update your minimum. But with the array that we're dealing with, the coordinates are always going to be 0 or greater. So 0 is going to be kind of hard to beat. So 0 is always going to be your minimum. What we actually really want to do here is to set these to where we're starting. And yeah, if anyone's confused, please just let me know in chat. So the minimum is where minimum row and maximum row is where we started. Minimum column and maximum column is where we started. Exactly. So what we can do is we can actually just maybe have a function defined in here. And then we can leverage the closure and not have to pass in the matrix to this recursive function. So this recursive function down here is actually the one that's gonna do all the work. Right. So this depth first search is going to do the same kind of search through everything, but then kind of update all these values. And then area is also going to be updated each time we visit a piece of land. We're going to add 1 to this area. And then hopefully this will work. Okay, so how are we doing on time? Right, we have 17 minutes left. Okay, so our depth first search is going to be basically the same thing. Let's actually pass in a row and column here. Okay, and we'll start our depth first search. Row, column, and so there's work to do there. I'm going to need to modify this code, but let me just kind of copy it there for now. So you don't necessarily have to write your code linearly, like top to bottom. While we're on the topic, we did remember if width and height is not equal, then it's not a square. So what we can do is figure out const width is max row minus min row plus 1, const height. Excuse me, I'm conflating the two. Column is actually left to right. So minimum and maximum column. Max row minus minimum row. It doesn't really matter if I mix these two up. It's just a little... it's just more accurate to say, associate column with a width. Yeah, so Junes, we're coming up with a reference solution to find the number of square islands. So let me know. We're doing this in JavaScript. Not sure if that's a language you're familiar with. And yeah, just kind of let me know if you're able to follow along. So our area, this area up here is the actual area that we find. So what we can do is area plus 1 plus plus. If width equals height and area equals width times height, return true. And this is something that I see a lot. Right, so if this expression evaluates to true, we return true. If this expression evaluates to false, you return false. So you're actually just like returning the value of this expression. So we can really just do return this. Okay. So now essentially what we need to do is we need to, in our DFS, we need to do this depth first search. We need to traverse all of the other nodes and update our minimum and maximum rows as we go, as well as the area, but the area is already taken care of here. Right. Let's update our minimum. Minimum row equals math.min min row minimum column. Right, so this part's kind of boring. Okay, so we're updating our area, we're updating our bounding box, and now we just need to visit all of the neighbors. Our recursive function is now DFS. We don't need to pass on the matrix. And this, while, you know, at some point we're actually going to be calling this with dr and dc equaling to 0, we just actually, that's a good catch. So right now this is an infinite loop. What we want to do is we want to make sure we had something like if matrix row column equals 1. So we only want to do this if this is land that we're looking at right now, and it's in bounds. Okay, so we call it depth first search. We calculate our width and height. Also, let me know if this text is readable. Nobody's complaining, so I'm assuming that it is right now. Okay, so now this should actually just return 1, because this 1 by 1 cell down here, 1 by 1 island right here is square, but this one is not. So it works. Great. Maybe let's modify, instead of this is something that I see quite a lot. I think it's easier to just actually make multiple tests instead of modifying an existing test case that you have. That way you actually can kind of maybe catch regressions as they happen. So this one should be 2. It's really helpful to also pass, write out the expected value for your test case. So you can, without having to do a bunch of mental math, you can just look at it and see, like, are these the same? Okay, so let's hit submit and see how we do. Okay, so it looks like, oh, interesting. So our performance test is failing because of a maximum call stack size. That makes sense. I'll have to think about that one. But then our extra credit test is failing because we are modifying the array directly. So essentially, what we can do is, as I was saying before, we can just have a visited, a set, and basically for each coordinate that we visit, just add it to this visited. Make sure we're not looking at the same one twice. Maybe you can have a helper function. I love one-line helper functions. These are so useful. Get key equals row column, row column. So I'm using a template string. This is really just a fancy way of doing row plus this plus this. So you can argue which one's more readable. I'm currently partial to this approach right now. You also want to make sure that whatever delimiter you use is a good delimiter. So if you have, row, right? So if we didn't have a delimiter here, you would consider 1 and 11 as well as 11. I'll make it a little bit different, as well as 12 and 1. Right, so these would map to the same key, which is not desirable. So if you add a delimiter, 121. So that's I think one of the trickier bugs to find. So our key here needs to have a depth first, not depth first. Although for some people in an interview it might feel like death. Yeah, so clearly articulating the difference between depth first and breadth first search in an interview, I think can be tricky, especially if you're like saying it multiple times. So I think it's actually just a lot easier to say DFS or BFS. That's generally what I do. So yeah, DFS. And if you're not familiar with DFS, I think that might be kind of outside of the scope of the chat today. But if you're interested, you can go to my site, set up a free chat with me. What I'll do is so the free chat is so I can it's so I can find more people to work with and help have a bigger impact. But I do these sessions in such a way that it's meant to be useful for you, whether or not we work together. And what I do is I'll work with you to kind of figure out kind of the root things to work on, maybe identify some low-hanging fruit, some easy things to get you to your goals. And I've done this for many people in my career, so I can kind of pick up on patterns and like fundamental misunderstandings or areas to work on very quickly, because I've been doing it for 10 years. Right, so back to our visited. So we can add visited dot add get key row column, and this is a set, so there's no associated value with the key. It's just tracking the existence. Not visited dot has get key row column, and that. So then now we don't need to do this. And if we run this, then no, submit. Oh, we are failing tests. Expected. Right. Duh. Okay, so we're marking it as visited. We need to mark it as visited after we check. So that's, there we go. Okay. Expected 4 to equal 1, 5 to equal 2. Okay, so we're getting some bugs. Right. If not visited has get key row and column. What I can do for now is actually just have get key row and column. Just inline this. Well, not inline this. Compute it one time. So if we've not visited, and this is land, add that to visited. Okay, so right. So maybe we'll have an interesting bug to track down. That's interesting. I was so convinced this was going to work. Okay, let's come up with a simple test case. Let's go back to the basics here, and run this and debug, because it's probably just going to be a simple mistake. So it looks like, so that's giving us 4, and then if we do 1 here, it'll be what, 5? No, 0. Okay, so DFS, we're returning true. So in that case, oh, right, okay. So yeah, so the tricky thing is, so what we're doing is, right, so that's visited, set is kind of being reset each time we start at a new coordinate. So our visited set is making sure that we're not revisiting cells multiple times, but only it gets reset each time we call is square again, which makes sense, right? So we're declaring it inside of this is square. So essentially what we need to do then is hoist this visited set out from is square and move it out to count square islands. And then is square matrix row column. Let's have the visited here. Matrix visited. And now we get 1, and then we run this, and now we're only failing this stress test of a 1000 by 1000 square island. And that's because the call stack is being exceeded. So maybe there's a way to do this. I might have to rethink that test case and decide if I want to allow a recursive solution, or maybe, yeah. So you'd have to do this with tail recursion, because JavaScript will prevent call stack overflows. So that's something for me to consider if I want to modify that stress test to allow recursive solutions that don't have tail recursion optimization. So yeah, we got to a working solution in just over an hour. Actually, the clock started, and since I started the algorithm, it's just under an hour. Hopefully people were able to follow along with that. This will be up as a reference solution on coachmatt.io. So if you want to find this specifically, you can go to my website, click on algos, and then go to count square islands. Right now, there's just the old reference solution, but I'm looking to have these 2 reference solutions there. So yeah, kind of as a refresher of what we did today, our count square islands function was a modified version of the count the number of islands, and we added the additional criteria of making sure that the width and height are the same, as well as the area being equal to the width times the height. And that seemed to do the trick. So, all right. You already stole that logging the answer along with the test trick from you. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this, you can take away maybe you can take away some kind of, bigger concepts about like, how do I approach approach an algorithms interview? But, what I really like too are these just really simple, straightforward, tips. So if you're in an interview, right, you can just literally like write your own tests like this. You call your function, and then you have the expected value, right? So like, const add equals a plus b, console.log add 1 2 3. Right, and some corner cases, I guess. 0, -1. Right, and then you run, and you can see clearly that all these tests are passing. So this obviously isn't something that you would use in a more serious application, but quick and dirty tests in an interview, this is incredibly helpful. And another thing that I did too, here in this depth first search, I forget exactly where I had this, but if we want to kind of track the the row and column, we can do this. Kind of the old-fashioned longhand would be something like, you could do like row, and then call. I see this all the time, right? Or you could do the, row, column. But then this is actually shorthand. Don't need this comma. This is shorthand for this here. So instead of all of these, right? So instead of these two things, you can just literally write this out. So that'll save you a few keystrokes. But saving yourself a few keystrokes, especially if you're doing it multiple times in an interview, if you can save, 10, 15 seconds, that's helpful. It's not massively different, but it's definitely helpful. And then a few more tips, and maybe you've gained a minute or two. And then an extra minute or two in an algorithm interview, especially when you have maybe only 40 minutes or so, could be the difference between getting it working or not. And then also in an algorithms interview, you don't even necessarily need to get a working solution. What I really look for when I'm interviewing someone is to make sure that I understand their thought process, that they're able to communicate effectively, that ideally even we're able to have an interesting conversation about the problem. They're able to anticipate corner cases, right? So the corner cases that I was mentioning with finding the number of islands, right? Like, what does it mean if the cell is on the corner? What does it mean if there's a hole inside of the island? Is that still like an island? If it's kind of like a donut. And then thinking about square islands, what if there's another cell that's, let me do it on white. What if like there's another cell that's on the corner, right? These are all fantastic clarifying questions. And for someone to kind of ask all of those up front, while you don't need to get all of the clarifying questions up front, you really want to get kind of as many as you can. And you can think of a few while you're working on the problem, actually, as I did today. That's okay. But those clarifying questions, being really thoughtful about all of the corner cases like that, really is a big part of kind of the final score in an interview. Of course, you need to be able to code, but if you're very thoughtful about corner cases, if you're very communicative, you don't necessarily need to get a working solution at the end to pass. And then, of course, well, not of course, but some interviewers may actually ask you a question that they don't necessarily expect you to finish. So that actually happened when I interviewed at Discord. They wanted me to build a chat application in 1 hour. And that's actually kind of part of the challenge, right? So to see if you get flustered, to see if you're able to kind of focus and make some meaningful progress in some area instead of just getting overwhelmed and focusing on the breadth and not really getting anything practical done. So, so good communication, clarifying questions, meaningful progress. Those are all very good indicators in an interview. So, all right, I'll give everyone another moment to ask any questions that you guys might have during this. I think I'm going to be doing these streams more regularly. I'll probably be marketing them as well, so have a few more people next time. And yeah, we'll see how it develops over the coming weeks. But you can expect this solution here with comments. Maybe I'll go ahead and add some comments while I give everyone else a chance to ask any questions that they might have. Okay. Right, so mapping coordinates to a string. Okay, it's helpful. Fantastic, thank you. Map coordinates to a string. To And this is actually one of the most challenging things that I find. So if you look at my reference solutions, I put a lot of time and energy into coming up with kind of the most concise solution, as well as comments that I feel aren't too verbose and actually really help you follow along. So yeah, if you try any of the algorithms on my site, I highly encourage you to take a peek at the reference solution, ideally after you've attempted the problem. Yeah, so these are meant to be easy to follow, and if they're not, then please let me know. I can hopefully either work with you to clear up any to clear anything up, or improve the comments, or both, right? Inclusive or. Okay, so map coordinates to string to. So what I'm trying to say here is this is meant to kind of like deduplicate. This is what am I trying to say here? Map coordinates to a string to prevent I'll come back to that one. Okay, so return true if, right, so if square, this function is actually self-evident. You can assume that like this is going to return a Boolean because of the naming. It's going to return true if it's a square. Maybe I can have some JS doc tags for what these things are, but I feel like those are also named fairly well. The minimum and maximum row and column. This is just the bounding box of the current island. Number of land pieces visited. No commented code. I feel very strongly about that. No noisy console logs. Okay. So if it's not visited and this is land, okay, so visit all neighbors, including diagonals. We've already visited row plus 0, column plus, so that will no op. So no op might not be a term that you're familiar with. It just means like no operation. Maybe you want to avoid terminology like this depending on your audience. I would like this to be accessible as possible, so so that will not be counted again. Okay. And then DFS. Yep. Okay. So no one else is asking any of the questions. So I think I'll just write a few more comments and then call it a day. Okay. So width, maximum minus the minimum plus 1. So what's like a good way to explain the plus 1 nature here? So if the maximum and minimum were equal, then the width, if the maximum column and minimum column were equal, then it's already a one width. Okay, sure, I can maybe start like that. let's do column. Yeah, maximum column and minimum column. A width of 1. So +1 to the difference. Yeah, that's kind of okay. Right. So yeah, writing really clean, concise, helpful comments that aren't like too verbose is very difficult. I actually find writing the clean and concise code to be a little bit easier. Maybe that will change as I practice writing more comments. Okay. So the result. Yeah, okay. I don't think this really needs any comments. I'll do like a JS doc tags up here later. This is all stuff for debugging, and then clean this up. And yeah, so those are, I think, kind of where I would put comments to explain this. Yeah, thanks everybody for listening, asking questions. You can go to my site. I also do have a Discord, and that is, I believe, in the description for this stream right now. So you're welcome to join the Discord. That is also where I do my kind of one-on-one support for my my clients. So if we do work together, then you'll be seeing a lot more of me in there. But I'm also looking to maybe open the Discord up for more of a community as I develop my content and audience. So thanks everybody. Yeah, take care. Good luck out there. Bye.